Good morning, gamer! So a lot of people have asked me for a tutorial about the Carlson movement, so I'm just gonna make a really quick and shitty tutorial about how I did it. So I've got my empty scene here with a couple of boxes, and the first thing we're gonna do is we are going to create a new layer and call it ground. Then we're going to select everything that we want to be ground and jumpable and walkable, and we're just going to put it on the ground layer. Simple as that. Next up, we are going to add our players. So I like to use capsules because they totally look like players, and we're just going to scale them up a bit. There you go. Looking pretty good. But before we get started, something is missing. So let's just... much better. Now he's fucking cool. Okay, so on your capsule, which is our player, let's just go ahead and call him player. We are going to add a rigid body. And on the rigid body, I'm going to up the mass just a little bit. And I'm also going to make him interpolate. This will just make sure that the camera and everything is smooth. Then I'm going to create another empty game object, and I'm going to call this one camera. And then we're going to put our main camera under the camera. Also make sure that the main camera, which is the childhood object, is set to 0. And then again, if you go back to the player, we're going to create two empty game objects. So the first one we're going to call orientation. This will just keep track of our orientation. The second one we're going to call head, and this is where the camera will be placed. So I'm going to move it up to about there, I guess. And this is where the camera will see. And now you want to follow the link in the description down below, and you can download the code. So we have player movement and move camera. So just make sure you get both of these scripts. So on the player, we are going to drag in the player movement script. And on the camera, we're going to drag in the move camera script. Now make sure you do this on the upper camera, not the actual lower camera. So we're also going to drag in the head of the player onto the player transform right there. And then going back to the player, we need to drag on first the camera, which again is the top one, not the main camera. And we're also just going to drag in the orientation. And finally, we need to say what is ground. So, well, ground. Yeah. And just like that, so we're having some technical difficulties here. We're going to go to the player, and we're actually going to freeze every single rotation. And I'm going to move the glasses under the orientation object. Okay, and there we go. We now have our movement. We can slide, we can jump, though we do jump very high. So what I like to do is, since the default gravity just seems very low, I like to go into physics and just make it bigger. So like minus 30, for example. Yeah, I don't know how smart of a thing this is to do, but it works. So yeah, there you go. Now one final step, which I forgot to mention, is you want to make a physics object. Where the fuck is that? There you go. And we're going to call it ground. And just set the friction to 0. And for everything you want to be walkable or jumpable or whatever, just drag on the, oh, that's everything. Fuck. So yeah, for all the ground things, you just want to drag on the ground physics material like that. Boom. The reason we're doing this is because we're completely controlling all the forces in the script. So we don't want any friction or anything like that, because we're doing that in the script. So there you go. Now the sliding is working, and jumping is working fine. You can adjust the jump force and the gravity and whatever. So I'm not going to go over wall running in this video. I'm going to do that for the next part because I still have a lot of work to do with the wall running. It's far from perfect, barely works. It's kind of just put together with duct tape. Yeah. So I think that's going to be it. I'm going to go over the code in the end of the video. So just kind of explain some things if you're interested in that. I also dropped some epic Carlson merch. So if you're interested in that, there's a link down below. You know, I'm not supposed to give my personal opinion, but it's pretty sick. So you should definitely go get some milk merch if you want some of that. So again, it's, you know, it's far from perfect. You can bunny hop really well if you know how to strafe. And there, you know, it's a bit wonky, but it's a very good base, I think. So you can really expand upon this and make a lot of cool things. Anyway, yeah, that's gonna be it for me. Thanks for watching. Part 2 is coming, I don't know, when it's ready, I guess. I'm working on a lot of other videos as well, so it's like, yeah, I don't know. I'm not focusing too much on tutorials, but I'll make a few and, you know, upload whenever I have time. So yeah, hopefully this worked. If it didn't, then I guess, see ya, I'm out, peace. So I'm not gonna write the whole script, obviously, but I'm gonna walk you through it and kind of explain what I've done. So first off, the move camera is literally just following the player. Now the reason we're not putting it under the player, but actually in its own script and just make it follow the player is because this will avoid any jitteriness in the camera. Because if we were to put the camera under the player, then we would have a lot of weird camera movement, which we don't want. So this is why we're doing this. So just to make a single prefab, we could just do like a player container and then just drag the player and the camera under the player container. Then just drag the player container down and we have our prefab. So whenever we want to make a new player, you just kind of drag it out, boom. So next up we have the movement script. And as you can see here, you have a lot of values you can change. You have the move speed, the max speed, the counter movement, which is how fast you'll stop moving. Or I guess kind of, yeah, it's the friction pretty much. You have the max slope angle. It doesn't really work very well with slopes because I haven't optimized it for that yet. So you're gonna have to build a bit on this yourself. Then you have the slide force, which is how much you slide when you crouch. You have the slide counter movement, which is how much friction you have when sliding. And then obviously just the jump force, which is pretty straightforward. So if we open up the player movement here, let's see. This is a big old mess, but I've tried to clean it up as much as I can. So again, here are just some basic values, blah, 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 boring. So this will just make sure that our cursor is locked to the screen, which is, you know, it's always pretty good. We're doing our movement in the fixed update, some input and some look in the update. So obviously, if you're doing this properly, you want to put the input in a separate class and just call the movement functions from there. But I'm too lazy, so there you go. It's all in the player movement class. You have our crouch, which is pretty basic, our stop crouch, which is also pretty basic, and then comes our movement. So first off, I just add a very slight force down constantly. Now this is just to make sure that the collision is working properly and also just to add a little bit of gravity. But if we don't have this line, then the ground collision is not going to work very well. Oh, maybe I should scale it up a bit, whoops. So then we find the velocity relative to where you're looking, which is very important for counteracting the movement, which we're doing here. This is the counter movement. This makes sure you're not just sliding around everywhere, which would not be very fun. So that's why we're adding counter movements. Also just jumping, max speed. And these are also kind of interesting. So for example, if you're in the air, then this is how fast you'll be moving. So you're moving at half the speed in the air. And then if you're sliding, you can't move at all. So this just basically makes sure you can look around while sliding, which is, you know, pretty cool. There's a jump, nothing interesting there. Here is just rotating the player and looking around, blah, blah, blah. And then we have the counter movement. The counter movement is pretty basic. All it does is if you're not holding down any keys, then you're going to slow down. And you can change how much you want it to slow down with the counter movement variable up top. And then you have some diagonal running limiting because you run really fast diagonally. So if you don't have these lines of code, you're gonna run faster than the max speed. Now this is not perfect. You can run like slightly faster, but whatever, I don't care. Here's the function that finds your velocity relative to where you're looking, which is a bunch of math, boring. You have the function that checks if it's floor, which is using the max slope angle, so you can change this as you like. And then we just have some collision detection stuff. So I don't know what I've done here, but yeah, it works. So it's pretty cool. Took some time, so I can't really remember what this is, but who cares? Yeah, okay. See ya. I'm out. Peace.